Ayan, teka, mag-testing po tayo ng ano. Hello, AVP Len! Hello, VP Carms. Testing natin yung ano, background.
Hey, ma.
Hello.
Hindi na ako magpapakita ah.
Very
Stream mo na lang
po.
kayo.
Opo, thank you po. Teka, dandandali. Magpapalit ako ng background. Okay, this one. Once. Naka-jacket ka na, VP Carms? Nag-jacket na ako.
Yeah.
Side, ay, ang ganda mo! Oh my God.
Oy, ikaw rin.
Love it. Ganun talaga yun. Pag binati, kailangan susuklian mo.
Yes, of course. I think we're streaming live. Hello, mga kakwentuhan.
Baliw, hindi pa. Di ba hindi
Okay.
pa AVP? Hindi pa nakastream.
Alive na, ma'am.
Ay, ano ba yun?
Testing ko kasi, ma'am, para sure na naka-live streaming na tayo.
Okay. Formal na. Ano ba yan? Kala ko hindi pa tayo nakastream live. Sige, antayin natin ang iba. Nanonood pa naman si ano? Si Mr. Chair.
Hi, Mr. Chair. Shout out to Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, ang aga nating nag-open kasi nakakahiya. Ayan ako, nagtatype.
So this will be an exciting kwentuhang cybersecurity for today.
Yeah.
So for those who are already tuned in, hello, kamusta? Mabuhay?
And by the way, VP Carms, I love the logos at your background. You have 12 logos in your Zoom background right now.
Yes. So actually, masyado tayong pinaunlakan ng ating mga technology partners, right? So, and they will be supporting us for this afternoon.
Oo, ayan daw. So hello. Ayan, may mga bumabati na sa atin ngayon dun sa comment section.
Yeah, nasaan na yung mga angels natin?
Ay, oo.
Kailangan natin ng mga pa-shout out today.
Sige. Medyo marami po kami ngayon. Kung nanonood po ang ating BOD at ang ating Pix Pro subchapters, no, marami po kami ngayon hosts dahil dito po sa NCR, we also invited our AVPs to join us, and also ang ating host for today, ang ating guest speaker coming from Napoleon and 𝐏𝐈𝐂𝐒. So antayin lang po natin. Coming from Napoleon and 𝐏𝐈𝐂𝐒. So
So while waiting, maybe magbasa tayo ng mga comments if there are already viewers. So while waiting, maybe
ayan, minute ko na muna, VP Carms. Pero syempre, nababasa ko po sa ating comment section. Hello from Cebu, sabi ni Miss Yomi Fragile. VP Carms. Ayan, and then from Sir Chris Banzuela, magandang hapon po. Medyo maaga po, tayo nag-start. Pero sayang naman yung hinanda mong song number, VP Carm. Siguro i-play na muna natin ngayon.
I know, right?
Nakatuwa naman po naglalagin na ang ating mga suking audience for the laging ano yan sa kanila Tuwing Friday ng alas 5 ay alas Pix Pro na. So ayan. So it's a habit na for them to join the KC on FB Live. Ang gaganda naman daw ng mga host natin. Ayoko na sanang banggitin. Kasi gusto natin, humble tayo eh. Pero thank you, Mr. Chair. Ano ba to? Mr. Chair, pinapakaba mo kami. Ay, nako. Alright. So, and ang ganda ng shirt mo ay ng iyong jacket, VP Carms. Patingin naman ng logo dyan.
Yes. Magda-live selling po muna tayo.
Pamay na lang po.
Pamay na lang po.
SS.
So this is the logo of Pix Pro NCR.
Yep.
Yan. Nakikita ba?
Yes.
Mas visible yung sa'yo, President Jen.
Opo. So ito po, yeah, we have the logo of the Pix Pro National and also the logo of, nakita ba? Ayan, the Pix Pro NCR. So actually, this is our first run of the tech partner-led Kwentuhang Cybersecurity of the Philippine Institute of Cybersecurity Professional, hosted by NCR. And today, we actually have, again, the guests from Netpolion and 𝐏𝐶ognito. And I think you also have to mention yung ating susunod po na schedule, VP Carms, para at least aware din po.
Yeah, so we already have a lineup of tech academy partners who will be sponsoring this Kwentuhang Cybersecurity. So wag po kayong magsasawang manood sa amin every second week and fourth week of every month. So sa mga kakwentuhan natin, every 5 p.m. Kapix Pro, okay, 5 p.m. every Friday. So magkita-kita tayo every second and fourth week. But of course, it will still be, weekly, the Kwentuhang Cybersecurity, but for our NCR technology partners will be leading it every second and fourth week. So for the second week of August, it will be from MTech. Okay, so tune in and just like and follow the Facebook page of Pix Pro for all the updates on our speakers.
Pwede ng vlogger, VP Carms.
Yes.
And by the way, maiba po ako. Nagkaroon tayo ng 7.3 magnitude na earthquake last time. So sana po ay safe ang lahat. Sa mga kapatid nating nasa norte, sana po ay safe kayo sa puntong to. And dasal lang, no? I mean, we have natural disaster, no? But life goes on. So sana safe po ang lahat. Okay, so actually we are joined right now by, ayan, papasok na po sa ating KC, si VP Apple Salud. And by the way, for our audience today, VP Apple Salud is the Vice President of Membership in NCR. VP Carmela is our VP for Training and Events in NCR. And later on, we will be joined by the AVPs, AVP Frenzy and AVP Jessie, and I think AVP Wana will be joining us. Unfortunately, our VP for Training Events, VP Marlon Umali, will not be joining us today. But hello, kamusta dyan? VP Marlon? Si VP Rock, nasaan po? Isang shout out. Nasaan na si VP Rock? Ayan, nagre-ready na si VP Apple. Hello, VP Apple. Magpakita ka naman. Face reveal. So, nag-wear siya ng jacket, syempre. He's wearing our official jacket, loud and proud, with our logos in there.
1 minute lang, wearing my jacket.
Wow, syempre po. Sige po, sige po. Wala pa naman po tayo. Naka-stream na po tayo live pala. Pero sige, wala pa naman pong 5 o'clock. We're waiting for some more from our audience po na mag-join.
Yes, so to our technology partners, so we have AMT, M-Security, MTech, right? Fujitsu, MEC, iTraverse, MDI Novare, Nexus, Netpolion Trends, Who else do we have? UAS. Okay. So thank you very much again from our technology partners.
Actually, for the sake of the audience, the knowledge of the audience, we had our grand launching and our ceremonial signing last July 14 at the Manila Southwoods Golf and Country Club. And like what the VP Carmela mentioned, that this has been attended by our 10 very generous and outstanding partners from the National Capital Region. Yung background po na nakita niyo po sa taas. So maraming salamat po to our Tech Academy partners. So we are so excited. Like what we said, this is our first tech partner-led, hosted by NCR for the 𝐏𝐈𝐂𝐒𝐏𝐶 𝐍𝐂𝐑 security. So we have so much more later on as we go along with sa ating pong schedule. But before that, so by the way, no, sana po mag-stick kayo hanggang sa pagkatapos ng 𝐏𝐈𝐂𝐒𝐏𝐶 tonight. Dahil we have ayuda, di ba? We have ayuda coming from Netpolion. So mamaya na lang po namin i-announce pati po ng mechanics. So please stay tuned and let us just enjoy. You know, we learn from each other today. We have ayuda coming from Netpolion. So, ayan na, dyan na si VP Apple. Hello, VP Apple. Magandang hapon.
Magandang hapon sa mga magagandang dilag ng NCR 𝐿Pix-Pro.
Present po. Ayan. So naririnig ko ang background mo, VP Carms. Teka, may feedback. Ayan na, nag-comment na nga si Mr. Chair. Ay, happy Friday daw. Sabi daw po ni Mr. Veder Sanohan. Happy Friday po. And Miss Catherine, magandang hapon din po. Good afternoon, 𝐿Pix-Pro. Sabi po niya, ganun din po. Buenas tardes, amigos, 𝐿Pix-Pro. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Carlos Alberto Reyes. Some other comments po, baka po mga nag-pop up na po sa inyo. Ayun po, ang ating isa sa mga
Chair, salamat sa pag-comment.
Opo. Good afternoon din po, sabi ng ating top fan na si Mr. Mike Angelo Matrido. Hello, happy Friday po, Sir Mike.
Kay Sir Herald, happy Friday din po sa inyo.
Pero ito yung hindi ko mapapalampas na comment. Napaka-pogi daw po ng VP Apple, according to Mr. Chair.
Ay, totoo naman.
Totoo naman yan.
Ito na nagagawa ng teknolohiya. Deep fake po ito. Hindi.
Correct. So sa amin naman po, ito yung mga naman nagagawa ng siyensya. Yan.
Ito po mga natural lang, mga natural.
Oo, correct. Materiales fuertes, sabi nga nila. Bakit ako lang yung nandun lang nakafocus? Ayan. Pakita naman natin, magpakita naman po kayo, AVP Jessie, AVP Frenzy. Face reveal po tayo dyan kasi syempre po, tatatlo lang po kami dito. Oh. Inaantay natin. Oh, ayan na. So waiting for AVP Frenzy. Ayan. At merong artistang kamukha tong si AVP Jessie eh. Wait lang. Parang Andy Eigenman? Ganon? Andy Eigenman ba?
Sabi nila sa video daw, parang Liza Soberano. Pero nagulat din ako eh. Pero nag face to face na.
Actually, yes. Nagulat din ako nung nakita ko si AVP Jessie eh. Gusto ko sana nga magpa-fan sign.
Kaya love kita eh, VP Carbs.
So, sa mga viewers natin dyan, okay? So, every Friday, you'll see us. So, support, follow 𝐿Pix-Pro FB page.
Ayun na si AVP Frenzy. Baka naman ipa-spotlight pa natin si AVP Frenzy. Hello! Good afternoon, AVP.
Hi, Press.
Baka naman ipa-spotlight pa natin. Hello! May fine ba yung hindi naka-jacket, VP Carms?
Oh, sana wala.
Yes, we will
Parang
impose.
nabalitaan ko meron.
Oo.
Parang mag-volunteer daw yun na host next na Casey.
Okay, noted.
Yun naman pala. Mabait naman.
So AVPs, pa-read na lang ng ating mga FB messages if we have, no? And siguro we'll start in exactly 5 p.m. Right?
Alright. So I think kauna-unahan, pinakagwapo sa lahat, Tony Stark. Siya ang unang-una nakita ko dito.
Ay, hulaan muna natin kung sino yan.
Kasi na yan.
Sino
Ang hirap
yan?
nito. Ang hirap nito, kauna-unahan nakita
Ang
ko.
hirap. Ang hirap na.
Nung nakita ko nga ito ng personal, nagpa-picture agad ako eh.
Ay.
Grabe. Hello po, Mr. Chair, Angel Redoble. Hello po, sir.
Jerry Pamillan is also watching. Hello, Sir Jerry.
Si Miss Chris Reyes, good afternoon po. Ito parang ang hirap bigkasin eh. Teka, talakag, tapos yung surname niya walang vowel. So, hello, Mr. Talakag, good afternoon po. Then we also have top fan, si Sir Mike Matrido. Good afternoon po. Sino pa ba? AVP Frenzy.
So we have actually Hermenio Camarin. Hello po, good afternoon. And good afternoon din Sir Sean Solitario.
Parang ano to, parang fan.
Comment naman po.
fan.
Saan po kayo nanonood ng lokasyon ng Pilipinas? Di ba po? Kanina meron tayo from Cebu, meron po tayo from Bulacan. So, comment naman po saang location po tayo ngayon na nanonood ng Casey.
Pero alam ko si Ian Sean, parang Bulacan din yan, ma'am. Kababayan mo yan, Press Jen.
Wow, ang dami sa gabi.
Wow! Talaga po. Ayan. Tingnan natin kung meron tayong, kasi napapanood po tayo ng buong Pilipinas. NCR chapter. Ay, ayan na po. Hello, VP Sheila.
Hello,
So we have VP Sheila as well. Good afternoon, VP Sheila.
Hi, good afternoon, VP Sheila.
So mamaya po, no, ilang minutes na lamang po. We have, I think, 6 minutes na lang o 5 minutes para i-start na po ang ating KC. So siguro, I think waiting na rin sa kabilang line, ano, sa lobby, si Hans, ang atin pong speaker for today.
Ito hindi ko palalagpasin. Ang pinakamagaling na speaker from Fortinet, Mr. Mark Cayubit. Hello, Mark.
Hi, Mark. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Uy, meron po tayong audience po pala from Philippine Coast Guard. Hello, Sir Rick Graffy.
Hello po sa mga taga-Philippine Coast Guard. Also, we have Ma'am Chris Rason. Hi, Ma'am Chris. How are you? Thank you for watching, everyone.
Pero ngayon po, mga Pix Pro NCR, saan po tayo nanonood? Ako po ay nasa Bulacan ngayon. Kayo po, nasaan po kayong panig ng Pilipinas?
Kami ba yan, President Jen?
Yes, opo.
Oo, dito lang po sa Kalakhang, Maynila.
VP Apple? Si VP Apple nakamute ata.
Yes, ako ay nasa Taguig sa ngayon.
Taguig. Taga-Taguig pala si Sir Apple. VP Frenzy, you are
Taguig.
from?
Pasig po.
Pasig. AVP Jessie.
Yes.
Magkapit bahay lang tayo from Malabon City.
Ay, alam mo, balita ko masarap daw ang pansit Malabon. Pero hindi ako naniniwala hanggat hindi pa ako nakakatikim.
Hindi natin natitikman.
Anong relyanong bangus? Hindi pa ako nakakatikim ng sagap Malabon. I wish sana no, makatikim ako minsan.
Kasamahan ko pa yan ng mga alimango.
Pansit, what's that? Pansit luglog, right?
Pansit, yung pansit. Palabok, parang yun. Yung
Palabok,
ibang term
oo.
sa iba, yes.
Ano yung idadagdag mo? Wait, ano nga ulit, AVP Jessie? Yung
Ano
idadagdag
lang, okay lang ba yung alimango saka tiger prawn? Kung okay lang.
Pwede. Pero wag mong kakalimutan na recorded ito. Recorded ko ngayon, naka-live tayo.
At naka-live
Live
tayo.
tayo, madam.
Filipino.
Baka nagugutom na ang ating mga viewers.
Yes, Jen.
Eh, wait lang. Andiyan po si
President,
AVP
may-
Wana. Sorry po,
Hi,
AVP
AVP
Wana.
Wana.
Hello, ka namin na. Ayan, sorry po, AVP Wana. One of the beautiful pieces also of NCR.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Kwentuhang Cybersecurity.
May fine daw ang walang jacket.
Oh my God, wait.
Simple lang naman yon AVP Wana. So sa next case natin, yun yung mag-host. Yung
Okay,
walang jacket.
alright.
Okay.
Okay, sige.
Every second and fourth week of the month. So,
Yes.
so next week,
So, sa
mauna
mga
si
kaka-join lang ng ating Kwentuhang Cybersecurity in FB. So we will be hosting, NCR will be hosting our Kwentuhang Cybersecurity every second and fourth week of every month. So again, follow the the Facebook page of 𝐏𝐈𝐂𝐒𝐏𝐿𝐒.
Kita mo naman, VP Carms, meron tayong viewer from Butuan City.
Wow.
Herminio Macamarin, taga Butuan pala po si Sir Herminio. Yan po,
Yeah.
laging
So,
follow.
kaya nga President Jen, so itong kwentuhang cybersecurity is very very effective, no, para ma-reach out natin yung mga iba't ibang lugar dito sa Pilipinas, and for us to be able to educate and promote cybersecurity awareness, right?
I agree.
So nakakatuwa naman. Sana lumaki pa yung community and malaki pa yung dumami pa yung ating viewers para sa mga susunod na mga sessions. And I think ang magiging maganda rin dito is that, you know, yung mga technology partners natin, they also have like offices in different parts of the Philippines, right? So please encourage all of them, you know, yung mga nasa Cebu, mga nasa Mindanao. So let's all join and watch and take advantage of this Kwentuhang Cybersecurity every Friday, 5 p.m.
And of
5 o'clock.
With 1 minute, I think, remaining of the time before we start, siguro bibigyan ko ng sir, encourage po natin dahil po ang ating VP for membership is here, VP Apple. So siya lang po ang lalapitan nyo. So Sir VP Apple, the floor is yours po para po ma-encourage po natin ang mga members pa ng NCR chapter.
yes, doon sa lahat ng mga ka-Pix Pro natin at hindi pa, lalong-lalo na yung mga hindi pa ka-Pix Pro, no? Please feel free to join us, especially in NCR chapter, to promote cybersecurity awareness para sa mga kasama natin sa industriya, and not only siguro sa industriya sa cybersecurity, no, even sa labas ng industriya, kasi yun nga, kagaya ng sinasabi din usually ni Mr. Chair, no, security is actually everybody's responsibility. So let us encourage everyone to join this cause, which is we are starting with Pix Pro. So you can contact, pwede nyo po akong kontakin, Apple Solud, and also yung AVP namin for membership secretariat, si Miss Wana Bruce. Okay? And shout and hello to VP Sheila and VP Alex. Mr. Chair, hindi po beauty pageant ito, pero oo nga po, tama kayo. Napapaligiran kami ng nagagandahang dilag.
Bagong
Sabi ni
hairstyle
Mr.
mo,
Chair,
AVP
nagiging beauty pageant
Wana.
na daw ang case.
Yes, I cut my hair.
Maganda, maganda.
Po. And actually, sabi nga ng comment ni VP Alex na nanonood po ngayon, mawawalan daw ng trabaho si Mr. Chair. Naku, hindi po. Dahil ito, start na natin, kinakabahan po kaming lahat ngayon. Parang siguro pare-pares tayo ng feeling, para po tayong nasa, alam mo yung college ka na nasa thesis ka, yung nandyan yung nanonood yung panelist mo. Di ba po? Parang ganun yung feeling. Kasi actually, this is our first session. Like what I said earlier, ito po yung first session na nag-host ang NCR. Salamat po sa oportunidad na binigay ng Pix Pro National At sa pagkakataon pong ito, no, we are actually having also our tech partners, NCR Tech Academy partners as our guest speakers sa mga susunod na sessions from this day on. Ay, ayan pala si Sir VP Rack, admit muna po natin. Okay, so yun. So sinisimulan ko na po dahil alas 5 na, alas Pix Pro na. Alright? And to start that, ladies and gentlemen, magandang hapon po sa lahat. I am Jennifer Tan, the president for Pix Pro NCR chapter. Gaya nga lang sabi ko kanina, kabado po ang lahat. Dahil wala ngayon ang BOD. Sila po ay nandun sa kabilang side at audience natin ngayon. Samantalang noon, madalas po tayo, at ako pag uma-attend ako ng KC, I have learned the art of multitasking. I am taking my coffee, I'm having my merienda, I am driving, I am learning as well through the KC. But right now, we are hosting it. Okay? Kakaibang pakiramdam. Pero this session is not meant to identify ourselves dahil nandito tayo ngayon bilang speakers or bilang hosts. This session is not to identify ourselves as those who are all-knowing or those who have the authority because we're on the other side now. Rather, this is a symbiotic relationship wherein there is a mutualism by sharing what you know and at the same time learning from others as well. In fact, ito pong pagkakataong ito ay isang oportunidad na makapag-share po tayo through cybersecurity awareness and also to learn from it. Dahil kami rin po bilang mga host na nakaupo dito ngayon ay maaaring matuto, no, gaya po nung audience na natin nasa online community. So muli po, maraming salamat po sa, ngayon pa lang nagpapasalamat na ako. Abangan po natin, we have Ayuda today, care of our host or guest. Pero bago yon, I will give the floor to our VP, Carmela De Jesus, our VP for training and events, for the introduction of our guest speaker.
Yeah, thank you very much, President Jen. And as mentioned by President Jen, this is our first session, which is sponsored and in collaboration with our technology academy partner, which is Netpolion. So with that, okay, we have our very prestigious speaker coming from the APAC region of 𝐏𝐶𝐂𝐑, Mr. Hans Behr. He's based out of Taiwan, but he was able to accommodate us for today's Kwentuhang Cybersecurity. So in this session of Hans, he will be talking about, how companies' attack surfaces change in terms of how to incorporate best practices and to stay ahead of attackers. So what you can expect out of this session is how to identify and keep up with the most critical risk of your company. And not only your company, okay, it may be applicable also to us individuals. And then he will be talking about risk initiatives to put in place to mature your organization's programs. And at the same time, he will be talking in broader sense on how attack surface reduction and management can be applied in our everyday life. Okay, so without any more further introductions, I'll give the floor to Mr. Hans Behr.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction, and obviously I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. Right, so there's a lot to go through. Everybody, I hope you have your coffee or tea or whatever you're drinking, and sit down and enjoy the ride. Right. So I am going to go through several different topics as it relates to just risk management, and I have a few slides to kind of help out and kind of guide the discussion a little bit. So. But the overall topic, as introduced, is really about trying to understand the attack surface, trying to understand the risk that organizations are dealing with as it relates to the overall attack surface. And just to level set, when I talk about an attack surface, what I mean by that is basically how are you viewed from the outside, right? So for organizations who have some type of a digital presence, whether it be a website, a series of websites, domains, IP addresses, like any kind of digital infrastructure that powers the business, right? Like, what does that look like from the outside? And so how do your customers view you? How does the world view you? But more importantly, how do attackers, view you, right? And so every day in the news, we hear about, new attacks that are happening, right? Whether it's, denial of service, or this particular company is been breached, ransomware, all of these things. It didn't start overnight, right? There was some type of planning that was involved, some type of targeted attack maybe, or so on and so forth. So all of this basically is where we'll be focusing our time today, just trying to understand the risks that are associated with having an attack surface that's maybe unmanaged, and trying to understand, of course, how do you assess the risk? How do you mitigate certain things that certain risks that you're experiencing, right? So that's kind of what we'll focus on today. Now, again, some of the takeaways, that we should focus on is, of course, how to identify and keep up with the most critical risks, right, that your company faces, and certain initiatives that you can put in place to maybe mature the programs that you have in place to actually deal with some of this cybersecurity risk. And then, of course, if there is a desire to reduce the attack surface and manage it a little bit better, then what can you expect? What can we do there? So these are some of the things that I'll kind of go through when we throughout our time today. Now, for those of you who are in cybersecurity as a profession, or maybe you're about to get into cybersecurity, then you'll know that it's there's a lot of moving pieces when it comes to just trying to keep up with all the new threats and trying to actually minimize risk, minimize the exposure that you have. But when we are talking to different cyber professionals, different cyber leaders, here is a small collection of things that we're hearing, just from that particular audience. Like this particular, the CISO for one of the big 4 consulting companies, we're testing less than 50% of our known attack surface today. And we always learn about new blind spots, right, on a weekly basis. So they're testing, a good bit, but they're always finding new blind spots. And so another testimonial from this other CISO for this Fortune 500 company. We've been using security rating solutions, right, for attack surface visibility and risk quantification, but they mostly just bombard us with false positives, right? So people in the team are chasing ghosts, essentially, right? These false positives that are just slowing them down. So another BISO from a Fortune 50 manufacturing company. We've invested in legacy external attack surface management products, but we're still breached through unmanaged applications. And my vulnerability assessment solution gives me 5,000 critical issues, and my prioritization vendor turns that into 1,000, but my actual ops team can only address 50 remediations per month, right? So that's a big gap, 5,000, 1,000, but they can only handle 50. So, the security practitioners have the work cut out for them, right? What these testimonials here are nothing new. Like, this is stuff that's happening across the industry, right? So, yeah, maybe this is resonating with you. Maybe you're experiencing something similar. So just to step back a little bit and look at the broader picture, 20 years ago, enterprise IT and security, the assessments that were done on a particular organization were very focused, right? They knew what was being protected. They were able to really focus on certain things. But as the ecosystem has evolved, as infrastructure as a service came into the picture, and that's, Amazon and Azure and Alibaba and all these other major platforms, or software as a service came into the picture, Splunk, and obviously we're using Zoom today. I would even put kind of Facebook into this category, right? And then even partners, as the ecosystem of partners even changed and started to broaden. Well, now this is the new mapping of what the attack surface looks like for an organization. Gone are the days where there is one little small thing to protect. Now you're much more broad and you have to protect a lot more. So with that in mind, the attackers have also adapted to this new ecosystem that has changed, right? So now it's not just focusing on what's happening within the walls of the company, but where else are attackers able to be effective? You know, so they're doing the same thing that you're doing essentially, right? That they need to understand what are those business relationships that exist out there just in the broader ecosystem as it relates to your company. So if your company is using any one of these, you know, infrastructure as a service or software as a service type of applications, then where do you live in those other platforms? And then, of course, from the attacker's perspective, they're trying to map essentially what that looks like. Have you taken care of things? Have you locked down your S3 buckets? Or do you have orphaned infrastructure that's not being maintained, but it's providing an entry point into the company? So they're doing all of this to try to prioritize where they're spending their time, right? So just like security professionals have a very finite amount of time in their day, so do the attackers, right? So they're trying to be efficient with getting access to your infrastructure, just like you're trying to, you know, focus your time on defending that type of thing. So that's just something to keep in mind is, you know, as you're evolving, so are the threat actors. But one thing that has not changed is the way that security assessments are done, essentially, right? So penetration tests on an annual basis, risk assessments on a quarterly basis. When web applications are established, you know, how often are they tested, right? If a web application or some type of portal or any kind of login capability into your environment, if that is changing, then are you testing that from the outside, right? Because from the attacker's view, from the public view, from your partner, your customer view, what are they seeing exactly, right? What's their experience like? And of course, from a security perspective, what's that security posture like, right? And so it's something to keep in mind, because as that ecosystem changes, then assessments have to change as well on a consistent basis. Like I mentioned a moment ago, the attackers are always trying to find the path of least resistance. How do they get in? How do they target, you know, your infrastructure? You know, if they're trying to discover what it looks like, are they able to find, you know, portals? Are they able to find, you know, web applications that are vulnerable and weak? You know, are they able to understand your business better than you understand your own business, right? Based on where the targeted personal identifiable information is, or where they can access files that they shouldn't be. That's what they're doing, right? They're trying to understand your business and the context of where the things are that they really want to target and get access to, right? And so that's consistently happening. And then, of course, you know, in their toolbox of compromise, what is that? You know, what are the tools that they're leveraging to try to get access to your environment? Right? They're scanning. They're digging deeper into vulnerabilities that they've uncovered. Right? You know, are they using exploit kits that they're buying on a dark web marketplace or forum? They're using Metasploit. They're using every tool that they can to try to understand how do they get access to you, right? But it's challenging, right? When we think about external attack surface and just the overall, you know, risk management that's involved there, how much of that, you know, how much visibility is truly there, right? You know, from an organization's perspective, do you really know what you have across the entire ecosystem? If someone has the ability to establish cloud infrastructure in the company's name, do you know about that? So typically, lack of visibility is a big problem. So that's across maybe the subsidiary network, right? Any business units or other departments. Again, cloud and web applications, and then of course lack of context, not really understanding who the owner of this infrastructure is. Is there PII exposed? Is there other data exposed? Sensitive information exposure? What's out there? Mapping that attack surface. So it's a constant challenge. And then knowing what's vulnerable. You know, this is also a big risk area where if testing is performed according to how it was done 10, 15 years ago, again, annual pen tests, quarterly assessments, things like that, then maybe that's not the right approach, right? Because the business is moving a lot quicker than that testing cycle. So of course, lack of a true understanding of the health of that infrastructure comes into play there too. And if the tools that are being used are creating a lot of false positives, or are not giving enough evidence as to what's real and what's not real, then it's not helping the organization either, right? And the people that are involved to actually fix these problems, they want to be able to focus their time and not spend a lot of cycles, in areas that they don't need to. So prioritizing the workload becomes a tremendous effort here. So we know that mean time to remediations continues to be a problem, where once the problem is identified to when the problem is fixed, there's a big gap, right? And it's typically 30 days, right? 30 to 45 days when a practitioner can actually fix a problem and not impact the business, right? So the mean time to remediation is a big issue. And if there are other teams that are involved to help out, red team, pen test teams, so on and so forth, where are they spending their time as well? And are they able to focus their energy on things that are important versus not? Now, again, looking at the broader picture of what are the benefits to focusing overall on all of these things and putting more rigor to the processes. Gaining more visibility is a key area that you would want to focus on. Understanding what are these assets that we own and that are using our name here, right? In order to truly understand how that really affects the risk posture, right? If it's a set of infrastructure that's low risk, but there's a lot of vulnerabilities there, well, how impactful is it if they're breached, right? Where are we collecting PII if there are certain compliance and regulatory issues that are related to the collection of personal information or where data is stored? Do you know where that infrastructure is, right? These types of things. And then of course the testing cycle, if you're able to test on a highly frequent basis, not an annual pen test and not a quarterly assessment, but able to test super frequently, right, and test everything that's under your control, then that's a good goal to have, right? To be able to truly focus on the things that matter versus maybe testing things that don't matter or not testing enough, right? Where these high risk areas would creep in, in the heat of a moment when you're going through some type of an incident, right? And then of course risk-based prioritization. So trying to really give the teams that really need to focus their energy a certain subset of infrastructure, again, websites, domains, so on and so forth, where they need to spend their time. Because if a bulk of their time is trying to figure out, well, what do we remediate? Is it important? Who's the service owner? So on and so forth, then remediation time just expands. But if you can bring that down by giving the team highly accurate, actionable set of data to work with, now that just brings their workload down tremendously. And of course, integrating all of that information into workflows that make sense to them, right? And then for all the specialized teams that are out there, whether they're penetration testing, pen testers, red teaming, so on and so forth, how are they spending their time? If the organization has outsourced a pen test or outsourced a red team activity, then what's in that scope of work? What are they actually testing against? Like, where are they starting? If you're able to know that right away, then you're able to scope that work a bit clearer and actually give them something that's real. This is where you spend your time. Don't focus over here, focus over here, because we know this is where the risk areas are. Something like that, right? Now, the modern approach to all of this, and this is something that we talk to security professionals about on a daily basis, is can you automate this? Can you automate from end to end, basically everything that we've talked about in order to reduce the risk, right, of human error, right? We know that if there are manual steps involved, and if there's a lot of turnover within an organization where you have different skill sets of people, you have junior people, you have senior people, but anytime there's a human involved, there's a certain level of human error. that's also inserted into the process. So if you can automate as much of this as possible, then that would put you on the right track, essentially, for reducing the overall risk. So if we can, if we start with discovery, what's out there, right? What's out there in our name, in our subsidiaries, in our entity, anything that's in the family of companies that that make up your organization, business units, so on and so forth. Then where is that stuff, right? Let's automate that. Let's find it on a highly frequent basis every day, looking. Is something new out there? Yes. Okay. Do we own it? Yes. Who owns it? And then we start to get more context behind it, right? The context meaning, does it collect personal identifiable information? Is this something that that we should be concerned about because it is collecting information that could be considered sensitive? And then, of course, taking all of that information and sending it over to a rigorous testing cycle that's happening highly frequently, like maybe every week, right? So if your environment is always changing, then your risk level is always changing. But if you don't know about it because you're not testing it on a highly frequent basis, then it's risk that is just lingering out there that you're not able to truly quantify, right? So when the board level and the boss asks the question, what's our cyber risk situation like? If you're not able to say with confidence, here's our exact situation as of right now, this week, that moment in that meeting, then there's a lot of lingering risk out there that is hopefully you'll never actually feel the harsh reality of when an incident happens and that risk is realized. But if you're able to say, well, here is our position as of now. We tested everything in our ecosystem, right? As of this week, that includes web applications, where our data is exposed. Are we using credentials that are easily breached or easily leveraged? Root, password, things such as this for the infrastructure. Then you want to know about it. And then again, when it comes to like the vulnerability assessment aspect of this, right? How often and how thorough are we testing? So if you can say that you're doing this on a weekly basis across every piece of infrastructure that you have that's publicly exposed, that helps you to answer the risk question, in a speedy way, right? And so again, as boards become more informed, as the C-level becomes more informed because of ransomware and other things, then being able to answer these questions rather quickly is advantageous, right? And so, of course, all that information, that once the test results come back, sending that over to the actual teams that need to manage this and using the workflows that they already have in existing, right? So if you've already subscribed to, some type of ticket management system or an orchestration platform or something like that, then taking that data from one end all the way to the other end of ticket creation, or like a Jira ticket, here's the system that needs to be patched, go ahead and patch it, and then you're able to track that in more real time, right, from detection all the way through to remediation, in an efficient way. So of course that helps to prevent breaches, essentially, because if you're testing on a highly frequent basis and you have your finger on the pulse with all of these things, then there's less wiggle room, less gap for attackers who are also performing reconnaissance on you in the same fashion, less room for them to actually wiggle in and cause problems, for the organization, essentially. And then of course it helps to fix the mean time to remediation gap that's there too. So I just wanted to put this in front of you, because when we think about these things, when we think about external risk management, when we think about what's out there, right? For some organizations, it's a big question mark, right? Like maybe they're using a scoring company or some type of set of manual processes to get a general idea of what's happening. But when it comes to the real true blue, what's the exact posture as the attacker sees it of everything in our estate? Then sometimes, sometimes it's a big question, and you don't want it to be a big question. Now we know that there's different maturity level in different organizations, right? On the left-hand side, when it comes to this red area, this is where most organizations were maybe 5 or 10 years ago, right? Lack of visibility, not much testing being done. took a lot of time, months even, to remediate problems. But as we started to see more awareness in this area with just the general practices of, again, getting visibility into what's out there, testing on a frequent basis, being able to truly understand what's there, right? You know, as it comes alive, then we start to see the maturity and the readiness level start to swing more towards the green area. Most organizations today operate in the orange, right? Where they think they're doing a good bit of discovery on infrastructure that's out there, and maybe they're testing on enough of a frequent basis where they have a certain comfort level, but maybe there's still these lingering issues that aren't completely closed off and kind of tied up. But obviously it's a journey. Cybersecurity was not baked into IT from the very beginning. So it's almost like a bolt-on, right? So everything that we're doing as practitioners, it's almost like doctors who are practicing medicine, right? It's kind of building it as we go along. So yeah. So don't feel bad if you're in the dark orange, maybe going towards the light orange, and if you're in the green, fantastic, well done. You have clear visibility into everything, and you're testing, and as problems come along, you're able to quickly heal within hours, right? So that's where we all want to be. So that's essentially what I wanted to walk through, everybody. What I wanted to walk through here today is truly, showing what's out there, right? When you think about external risk, when you think about all these problems that exist across the organization, then are you looking, right? Have you found every piece of infrastructure? Do you know about the vulnerabilities that exist on this infrastructure? Or are you still trying to learn, trying to get ahead of this? But when it comes to identifying risk and being in a position to start to mitigate some of the issues that you're finding, right? It all starts with, again, clear visibility, quicker testing cycles, and giving your team the issues that truly matter and that are real as it relates to the organization and the risk posture that they want to set. So that's where I'll pause. Probably some questions that we can kind of go into, but that's essentially what I wanted to put in front of everybody today, just to generate some thought and really get some discussion going here.
Very interesting, Hans. In fact, we have actually a bunch of questions for you. But well, to start with, I really love the way how you showed us what the view of an attacker and a defender, right? And I would agree with you. There's always an axiom that we always cannot defend what we cannot see, or we cannot protect what we can measure. Some may not agree with me on that one, but I think all of you would agree when I say that visibility, or full visibility, is a precondition of cybersecurity, right? So later on, we're gonna read some of the questions, but please stay tuned. But for now, allow me to give the floor to our very beautiful AVPs, not to read the comment section, because I think there are so many greetings there are questions. So on to you, AVP Jessie, AVP Juana, and AVP Francie.
Hello, yeah, thank you, Pres Jen. So, all right, good afternoon, mga ka-PIX Pro. So, I think as of now, we already have 58 viewers sa FB Live, but I think meron pa tayo, naka-live stream din tayo sa ating YouTube channel. So, thank you for watching us. So, of course, before lang tayo mag-proceed with the Q&A, so mag-shout-out muna tayo, AVPs. All right. And first, I'd like to acknowledge also the presence of our BODs. Hello po. Thank you for staying with us. So, okay. So, we have here, I think, si Mr. Seven hosting PH. Hello, Sir Seven. So, laging present to sa
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Hi, Mr. Chair.
Hello, everyone.
AVP Jessie, we have a question from the comment section.
Okay. So, can you read it, AVP Juana?
Yeah, so a question from Sir Tebo. Is 𝐏𝐈𝐂𝐒𝐏𝐈𝐂𝐻𝐿 a VIPT tool or software? Okay, so it's about the product.
Do you want to answer that, Hans? Hans is still
Yeah, the question is for Hans.
Yep. So just as a as an organization, 𝐏𝐈��� is a software as a service, cloud offering, right? So to be able to offer a view from the external, right? Everything that happens, from the attacker's eyes. So it's an offensive security tool. It doesn't require any installation, any hardware, software to go into a client's organization. It's really just, what do you look like from the outside? What do all of your sub companies look like from the outside? And then we start to test everything, right? So it's operating from that perspective.
And since we have opened the floor for questions, I think it's now the floor is open for panel discussion, and the online community, we encourage as well to post your questions in the comment section, and we're gonna read it. But for now, let me point you to VP Apple and VP Rock, because I believe may mga questions din po for Hans. On to you, VP Apple and VP Rock. By the way, VP Rock is our
thank you, President.
Our care.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Absolutely.
Yes, good afternoon. So, Hans, let me fire away with my first question, right? So, there are companies in the Philippines that are conglomerate in nature, and usually they have subsidiaries. So, how does focusing on risk at a specific subsidiary company level differ from looking at the overall risk related to the whole conglomerate or the whole company?
Yeah, thanks for that. It's interesting. Now, when you look at one company, that company may not be as significant compared to another one of the companies in the conglomerate, in the group, right? Like maybe one of the companies doesn't have much of a digital presence, right? Or it has a website. But if it were breached, then so what? There's not much infrastructure that would be damaging, that would lead up to the parent company, or even laterally into another. So when you focus purely from company to company, you're able to, of course, give sort of a bit of a prioritization, right, to one versus the other. But by focusing purely on company to company and not just big picture, right, then you as the leader of that organization, or the practitioner in charge of fixing problems, you know where to spend your time. And when you're reporting up to the senior leadership, the board level, C-level, you can echo that as it relates to the risk itself. Yes, we experienced a breach. Yes, we were defaced on a website, but it didn't impact us. That's a low risk organization as it relates to us. But if these were impacted, those are where that's where the meat is. That's where the big stuff is going to happen, right? So you're able to dissect the entire group of companies and really focus energy and apply risk sort of weighting to the ones that really matter.
Hans, you mentioned. Hi, Hans. Yep. You mentioned about board members. Well, most of the board members have started talking about cyber risks more. Will this risk approach allow us to educate them better?
It's interesting. Like when we look at the board members, what we typically think about is maybe some older person who just, maybe they're rich and they don't really know much about technology, so on and so forth. But that's a thing of the past, right? Because the board members, investors, people who are putting time into the company, they're getting caught up to what's happening now, because ransomware and some of these larger, more public breaches have forced them to really educate themselves on exactly what's going on, right? If they have to come out of pocket, millions of dollars in Bitcoin because someone has encrypted every bit of data on key servers and key organizations, then that opens your eyes, really wide immediately. So when it comes to just a risk approach to understanding companies, the health of each company, again, just testing highly frequently what's the health of that organization, and presenting that up in a risk management perspective, then absolutely, this is something that board level, C-level, board level appreciate, because now you're speaking their language. Before, again, they didn't even know how to spell cybersecurity, but now that's changed quite a bit. So absolutely, when you assess an organization from this perspective and you put everything in a risk management, cyber risk management approach and perspective to them, then it's much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We are actually still encouraging questions from our audience. Meron ka pa po ba dyan na VP Apple?
Actually, this is more of Hans. Probably, I know that you guys have been talking to a lot of companies out there, talking about risk, and also you did mention that we have to increase the test or the VAPTs, and automating it will also help the cybersecurity organization improve, and in essence the entire organization improve the mean time to remediate. But in most cases, right now, sometimes, in most cases, the VAPT team, they were able to do the testings and the scannings usually ahead of the agreed SLA, and it takes a while for the IT organization or the vendor to actually perform the remediation. So if that is the case, if you try to automate now more of the testing, will it not give more burden to the remediation team? And what do you think will be the probable middle ground, so that both the testing team and the remediation team will be able to accomplish the goals?
Yeah, and that's a very good point, and that's something that I think every security leader, it's like a nightmare, and that keeps them up, right? It's like, okay, yes, we have problems, but can we fix them quick enough, right? Or are we always going to see these same problems show up every month after month? One issue is not always equal to another issue. Like when you're looking at vulnerabilities, and this is kind of where the prioritization piece comes in. If you know where all of your key pieces of infrastructure are, right, and you're testing and you're coming back with vulnerability data on one piece of infrastructure, but maybe it's a low priority. It's high priority as it relates to the criticality, like the CVE score, and maybe the vendor says, oh, it's a critical issue, need to be fixed. But as it relates to you specifically, maybe it's not a critical issue. So the actual team has to consider these things, where, and this is where the outside in view really comes into play, where if it's a piece of infrastructure that the vendor says it's critical that you patch this, and when we test it, it's there, but from the outside, there's no way that the attacker can actually exploit that vulnerability, then it's critical, but it's not critical today. It's critical, maybe in a week or in a month or something like that. So by offering this external perspective to be able to say, well, what does the attacker really see, right? Do they even see that vulnerability, or can the team really prioritize, their time and energy on this? So if they've tested and now they have 100 critical high priority, but maybe there's no exploit for that vulnerability. There's no POC in the wild. There's no attacker group that has figured out a way to actually exploit their with their methods. Then now where are you prioritizing? So again, just the constant awareness is a good thing, and yes, it'll bring forward a lot of issues, but once those are really prioritized in the context of the business, other controls that you have in place, things like that, then the team can breathe a little bit and say, okay, a lot of high priorities, a lot of critical issues, but there's only 5 out of 50 that we really need to focus on now immediately, because incoming, the attacks are gonna start, right? We saw that recently with like the Log4j, right? We saw it again with Atlassian Confluence, right? So the time from when the vendor announced there were issues to where we saw it actively being exploited in the wild, like what does that look like? Now that window is getting shorter and shorter, right? It's now it's not like a week or something. Now it's like a matter of maybe hours in some situations, but it all depends on, again, the prioritization, the controls that are in place to defend. But if you're testing on a highly frequent basis, then you can see it's true visibility, and then you can do things like, oh, well, that was exposed yesterday. let's put that behind the WAF. Or, that was exposed and vulnerable. Let's take it offline because it's not a key part of the business that needs to function. So until we can fix it, let's just take it offline. So getting that visibility allows you some breathing room to prioritize and mitigate in other ways that just wasn't there before when you have these longer testing cycles, right? So, yeah.
Thank you. President, maybe we can take a look at if we have questions. I think we're getting questions sa ating sa mga topics pro natin sa FB.
Yes, actually po, pero bago ang lahat, babatiin ko muna po, ito ay suki po natin, Ben Izra Dakudao. Yan, lagi po yan nanonood yan every 5 o'clock. Ganon din po ang from Napoleon as well, si Miss Charlene Marasigan. Hello. At syempre, ito po yung mga idol ko ng mga speakers din, si VP Alex Bernardino, Vice Chair Oka, nandito rin po. At yung iba, sino pa po ba? AVP Juana and AVP Jessie. Bago po natin na
nakalimutan natin, Press Jen, yung Marian Rivera ng Pix Pro.
Ay, okay.
Yeah. Si VP Mia, nakita ko to
Good afternoon.
Hello. Good afternoon. And also we have Mr. Darwin Tejero. So sabi niya first time daw niyang umattend ng Pix Pro Cyber Security Kwentuhan. So hello po sir, sana hindi mo kalimutan ang first time mo.
Correct. And the AVP Jessie, may special na pa-shout out si Mr. Brian Perry Ortañez, di ba?
Ay, yeah. Oo nga pala. Nag-PM pa to sa Facebook.
Kulit?
Ulit.
At may question po tayo. Tama po. Kay Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Galing po kay Mr. Chair.
Okay, ito ang question ni Mr. Chair. Hans, what can you say about doing breach and attack simulation? Not just penetration testing.
Yeah, breach and attack simulation is an excellent way, right, to truly know, again, from the outside, like what do you really look like? Similar to a pen test, right? In some of those activities, breach and attack simulation could be considered intrusive, right? Because it's actually targeting vulnerabilities and maybe even impacting services, right? So, but if that helps to validate that a risk is there or not, then success. It's a controlled, it's a simulation essentially, right? As it's named. So it's a great way to do it, a great way to truly understand, if you're at risk or not, right? This breach and attack, simulation approach. Again, it's kind of like I was talking about in the slides earlier, where, if our testing sequence, if our assessments are not keeping up to how the business is evolving now, then you're creating a lot of gaps. Creating a lot of risk. And, if you find it with your activities, your cyber activities, then great. If someone else finds it with their, their maybe nefarious motives, right, as a hacker, then maybe not so great. But yeah, breach and attack simulation is, it's a way to go, right? So obviously you want to reduce the damage that does, just like a pen test. You don't want to take services offline that are going to impact the business. So use it sparingly, right? You use it in areas that you can absolutely control and maybe do without a service if it is impacted in a negative way during that simulation. So yeah.
Very well said. And if I may also be given the chance, by the way, pa-shout out daw. Syempre hindi natin makakalimutan ng shout out. Gayon din kay 7 Hosting PH. So actually ang katawang lupa po nito ay nasa Singapore, pero ang puso ay Pilipinong-Pilipino. Hello Anton Mondia. So yes, they're actually officers from the NCR chapter. Taga Parañaque po siya, nasa Parañaque siya ngayon. And also may I greet as well, we have here Ami Tabiliran. We also have here Cha Torres. And some other, yeah. Some more greetings. And by the way, since we have a few more minutes pa remaining sa ating kwentuhang cybersecurity, like what I mentioned, we prepared an ayuda for the lucky viewers today. So actually, there are actually 5, who will be winning like 500 peso. Is that a GCash or e-voucher? Saan nga ba makakapulot ng 500 pesos? Wala. Dito lang po yan sa kwentuhang cybersecurity every 5 p.m. Maaaring pwedeng ipambili yan ng merienda, ng pa-haircut, gaya ng kay AVP Juana, maaari pong pang grab transpo or pang milk tea. right? And with that, let me point you now to AVP Frenzy. I think AVP Frenzy, meron ka po yatang 5 questions dyan para sa ating 5 lucky viewers today.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So, Pres Jen, actually, before going to that, let's shout out muna yung mga tech partners natin na present for today's session. So, we have, for the iTraverse, of course, we have Boss Wendell, Sir Jordan, hello po, good afternoon. And of course, you mentioned Miss Amy from Fujitsu. Ayan po, good afternoon, everyone. So, yeah, thank you for watching. So, okay, so na-mention mo, Pres Jen, no? Meron tayong paayuda. So, si Netpol yun medyo nakaluwag-luwag today. So, meron paayuda, si Miss Jero Ann, the marketing of Netpolion. So, we actually have...
Napoleon.
Thank you.
So, we actually have
Thank you.
five that can win, actually 500. So, I think it was GC, no, Ma'am Jero? Tama ba?
Yes, GC, giveaway voucher.
Yeah. So, actually, we have questions for the audience. So, ready na ba kayo, ating mga watchers or viewers? Kamusta naman kayo dyan?
Ano po ang mechanics sa EVP Frenzy? You ask a question and then the answer po ay?
Yeah. So, okay. So, for the ating viewers na makakakuha ng tamang sagot, so you can just type #PixProNCR and then the answer. So, para hindi siya sobrang haba. #PixProNCR and then the answer. So, ayan po ang ating mechanics for the question and answer portion.
Yeah,
So, I think,
keyboard warriors, tanda na.
So, Miss Juana, maybe you could ask the first question to our viewers.
Hello, everyone. Okay, so ito na. Okay, question number 1. Why are mean time to remediations or MTTRs usually so long in organizations?
Ano po ba ang, ano po, parang essay ba ito na tayo? Pakiuli nga po.
Wala bang multiple choice?
Walang Tagalog translation.
Wala yata Tagalog translation eh.
President eh. Oh my God. Okay, again.
Parang, pwede nga muna, easy round.
Parang walang easy round. Sorry, Press. Why are mean time to remediations or MTTRs usually so long in organizations?
Uy, may sumagot.
Sumagot. Ang bilis.
Mga po ang galing-galing talaga.
God, yes, we have an answer from Sir Tebo.
Wow! Tama po ba ang kanyang
He
sagot?
said, budget constraints. Nako. Are we going to accept that? More answers, please.
Yeah. Maybe there are some answers pa from the other viewers.
Yes. Actually, we need a much more longer answer.
No. I think we can consider the closest answer to that. So, yeah, I think.
May isa pang answer.
Yeah, there's more.
The answers are coming in actually.
So there's another answer other than the budget constraints. There is also a lot of alerts to verify manually. Okay, medyo malayo.
But I think, Sir Hans, maybe you could share inputs to this.
Yes, because we got 2 answers already, Hans. So the first one is budget constraints, and the second answer was a lot of alerts to verify manually. And then the others is approval. And then the next one is modern external risk. And then the other answer is lack of support. So yeah, it's up to you, Hans.
We can actually give, like, I think there are 2 or 3 that are leaning towards the correct answer.
Yeah, the
closest
closest
answer
answer.
sa PixPro. Yes. So declare na po natin AVP Juana and AVP Frenzy.
Yeah, maybe we can keep a tally on who's providing the answers, right? So if we're going to see who has the most correct answers, if that's the way we're going to do it, then we'll keep a tally. But realistically, all of those answers sounded really good, right? Because the mean time to remediation it's not an easy thing to really quantify exactly where the slowdown is happening. External risk visibility, absolutely. Budget constraints, sure. If there's only one person trying to do the job of 5 people, then then that could be so yeah. So I think all those answers are really good answers. So which one is the
Yeah.
we'll just maybe we'll put them all, keep them all on the board, and see if those same people continue to answer, and if they do, if they answer
Yeah,
some of the next one's correct, because
Yeah, I
that
think
one's
Sir, yeah, Sir Hans, I think we got the closest answer from.
Yes.
So sorry for that. So I think we got the closest answer from Sir Emil, Ian, and Cisonero. His answer is actually #PixProNCR, no full visibility. So I think we can accept that answer, no?
Wonderful.
Yes. Congratulations, Sir Emil.
Congratulations, sir.
You are 500 peso rich, sir.
You win
Pero bago lang,
500.
tawang-tawa ko kay Sir Harold. Ang sabi niya, pass.
Pass yan, nagpass ka.
Salamat, Shopee. Hindi, salamat, Netpolion. Yes. All right. For the second question, here we go.
Easy naman. Easy question naman dyan.
Yeah, easy question.
What's my name? Ganun.
Go ahead. Sige po, ladies. For the next question, please.
Okay. Next question. Does automation help identify and reduce risk as it relates to a company's external exposure? Again. Does automation help identify and reduce risk as it relates to a company's external exposure?
And pamigayan, yes or no lang ang sagot, guys.
Yes or no?
Yes or no.
And then a little bit of explanation.
Ayan, I think Miss VP1 na meron na tayong answer. Nakatamang sagot from Sir Christopher J. Kotot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Congrats, Sir Christopher. So his answer is #PixProNCR, yes.
Okay. And then, ganito na lang, may magandang suggestion si VP Carm. Sorry, medyo shared na po tayo sa oras. Pero isang question na lang, right? And then mamaya, let's scroll. Dalawa ang mananalo sa raffle. Scroll like that. And then kung saan ma-point ang finger, yun ang nanalo. But before that, for the third and last question. Sino po? Sorry, na-declare na po ang ating second.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Pres. Okay, so for the last question, how have threat actors adapted to a company's IT ecosystem's evolution? So, paano? Again.
Naku, pag ganyan. Pag may
Essay po ang sagot, 1 paragraph.
Times Roman paper. Ay, naku. Ang hirap. Nosebleed.
How have threat actors adapted to a company's IT ecosystem evolution? No.
Maybe Hans can help the audience.
Hans, can you give multiple choice?
Yeah, I think this is another one of those areas that it's I think there's a lot of right answers here, right? Because if businesses are always evolving, they're acquiring other companies, they're selling off parts of their business, they're going into the cloud, then obviously that's where the attackers are spending their time too, right? So then what are the methods that those attackers are using to keep in step with how a company's changing? So let's say, as an example, there is like the Ayala group or something like that, right? Some big target organization that has all these different business units. Well, from an attacker's view, right, they're probably paying very close attention. Like if they want to get access to that, set of crown jewels because they want to embarrass them or they want to steal data, then what are the mechanisms that they're using to really fingerprint and do reconnaissance and target that organization as it's always changing, right? So some of the things that we see are, people, if there's news articles that talk about, Ayala Group is now partnered with AWS, right? So that means now they're migrating to the cloud maybe, right? So that's interesting open source information that could be used. So again, from that perspective, how does an attacker use that to their advantage? That's just one thought there, but hopefully that stirred some more answers to come from the group.
Yeah,
But-
I actually saw one answer here that is correct from Miss Chris Roson. Hi, Miss Chris. I miss you. So she said, #FixProNCR, discovering business relationships which might offer entry points into an organization. So that's correct. Congratulations, Miss
Right.
Chris.
Congratulations.
Ayan, so yung dalawa po, pwedeng
Yeah.
mabilis yung scroll tayo, Miss Jero. Habulin natin yung oras. Scroll sa comment section kung saan matapat. Ganun kabilis, mananalo ng 500 peso gift certificate. Okay po ba? Go ahead, Miss Jero.
Sure.
First
Ayan,
scroll.
Okay. Andyan pa po ba si Mr. Monteflor or Miss Monteflor PB?
Ayan, mukhang nandyan naman niya yata. Yes. Oh, nandun
Ayan.
daw. Yes. Okay.
Okay,
Congratulations.
congrats, sir.
Isa pa
Okay,
po.
for our last one,
Scroll. Without looking.
Franklin Mandane Miranda Jr.
Franklin Miranda Jr. Is that?
Miranda Jr., yes.
Congratulations po.
Congrats.
Yay! So,
Thank you.
thank you very much, 𝐏𝐶𝐞𝐵. Thank you very much, Netpolion. So, dun po sa mga winners, Miss Jero of Netpolion will reach out to you via siguro PM ng Facebook. Ano?
Yes.
But maraming salamat at congratulations. But before we end that, siguro konting key takeaways na lang. Ano? Meron na lang po tayong 2 minutes remaining. Unahin ko na po, simulan ko na. So in fact, the session today is really interactive, very interesting. And what struck me the most is when Hans presented about how we can reduce the attack surface via the proper management. And that's how you can engineer your networks. In fact, he also discussed about the dichotomy of being an attacker and a defender. So before there is a mutually exclusive relationship between the two. It's contradictory, right? But with full visibility, we can break that dichotomy and have yung emergence, yung magkakaroon ng binding. And that's actually what I really love from his presentation today. That is through full visibility. So what other comments po and other key takeaways are my dear VPs?
Yeah, so if I may, President Jen, right? So again, thank you very much, 𝐶𝐞𝐵, for this very informative session. So we will be doing, a lot of sessions. We may invite you as well, right, as continuation to what you have imparted to all of our viewers, right? Because what I've really appreciated is that, we're very familiar with the internal risk management, but we sometimes take for granted, the other external factors as well. And those external factors are really important in the organization, specifically with times right now, right? So in terms of our threat actors, where they're very fast in doing a lot of the cyber threat warfare or cyber threat, threats in terms of the in every industry. So it's very timely, right? So as mentioned by Hans a while ago, there are a lot of threat actors moving fast, and we really need to also move fast and be cyber security aware, okay, and be knowledgeable as to what are the other external factors that would affect the organization in terms of risk. And we need to have that prioritization. So that's another thing that I've learned from Hans, right? We need to prioritize what are the most important risks in the organization, whether it be external or internal, for us to be able to reduce also the MTTR.
Very well said, VP Carbs. Kung nasa beauty pageant tayo ngayon, ikaw ang Miss Universe ko.
Hi, ikaw naman ang Miss International.
So yeah, VP Rock, any key takeaways po? Igalaw mo ang baso, VP Rock. Nasaan ka po?
We're here. Well, number one, it's know your workloads. Implement proper, as Hans had mentioned, risk management approach, and be vigilant. Those are the three key takeaways in this session. Thank you.
And VP Apple, let's hear from you po.
So I'm getting also messages from non-cyber security professionals from field of IT and some even in sales and marketing. So may mga nanonood po, doon sa mga nanonood na non-cyber security, nagre-request sila na next time daw kung pwede nating medyo lemanize it for them, medyo para mas generic. So yes, we will try to do that in the next sessions. But for me, siguro one of my key takeaways is that again, it's more of yung natanong ko kanina. One of the questions that I asked is more on that is answered by prioritization. So while there are tools and products like what 𝐏-𝐶ognito is offering, which would increase actually the productivity of the cybersecurity professionals, the key is both the remediation team and the one who's pushing for remediation will have their elbows clashing. So in a world that we would want everyone in the organization, we would want to prevent the threat actors to penetrate. We would want to work harmoniously and to protect the organization. And in terms of prioritization, I think we should always align with business, because we know, of course, we prioritize based on CVEs, based on the risk that needs to be considered, but we also take note of what's the priority of the business. So to our viewers there who are less into cybersecurity right now, please do bear with your cybersecurity warriors, as they are very much overloaded, and we're trying to use things such as automation to make sure that we will be able to serve our organizations well. President?
Very much.
Very good, very good.
Lampas na po kami sa oras, pero kami po ay pahintulutan nyo sana. Meron na po kaming announcement for the next KC session. VP Carms, please.
Yes, so for our next KC session, so that will be on second week of August. So that's August 12, right? So please do follow the 𝐏𝐈𝐂𝐒𝐏𝐿 FB page, because weekly there will be Kwentuang Cybersecurity, but for NCR, our next host will be MTech, if I'm not mistaken, right? So MTech will be hosting our next KC session on August 12. So please stay tuned, okay, of the several announcements. So that's why it's very important for you to follow the FB page of 𝐵ICS-Pro, become a member so that you are also informed of new updates. And at the same time, malay mo, we will have our first face-to-face for national, right? For the national members, we will be doing that very soon.
Yes. At pagpasensya nyo na po sa mga hindi namin nabate sa comment section. Next time na lang po, babawi po kami. At muli po, maraming salamat to our 𝐵ICS-Pro NCR co-officers, board of directors, to our online community, of course, audience for today, and of course, our host, sponsored by Netpolion and 𝐶-𝐶ognito. At gaya po ng sinasabi ni Mr. Chairman Angel Redoble, hihiramin ko po ang kanyang mga linya. Sa cybersecurity, happy lang, sabay-sabay, walang
Happy lang,
weekend.
walang Friday.
Happy lang, walang weekend.
Maraming
Walang
salamat.
Happy lang, walang
Yes,
Happy lang, walang weekend. Bye,
Happy lang tayo.
Thank you.
Thank you, mga
Stay safe and be
𝐶-𝐶Pro.
happy,
See
everyone.
Thank you,
See you next
everyone.
week.
Thank you.
Thanks,
you.
Hans.
Okay, bye
Thank you,
everyone.
Hans.